Welcome to the podcast, Michelle Ford, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Danielle. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. I mean, Olympic gold medalist, world record holder, sports administrator, mother, and now author. Congratulations on your memoir, Turning the Tide, which I read cover to cover over Easter and really enjoyed it. What inspired you to write your swimming journey down?
I think a couple of things. I wanted to voice the concerns of many females who lived during an era that was baffled by doping and boycotts, and also to give a voice to those women, or at least being that I had so many opportunities in the administration and understand the administration of sport at all levels. I can see where how this works and hopefully become a voice for them.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we're going to dive really deep into that. But I suppose I wanted to ask you first, how was it sort of reliving all those highs and lows? Because you talk about going through your archive in your bedroom and pulling out all the news clippings and reliving all those things. So how was that?
Oh, that was dangerous.
I can imagine.
Not dangerous. It was an emotional roller coaster, really. Reliving some of the. I mean, you see the highs and the lows, and you relive that journey with a different eyes through different eyes. But then you try and compare it to today, and you realize that there's still a lot of those issues still alive today. And hence, when people said to me, is your story relevant? Absolutely relevant. And we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of hurdles to jump over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's totally relevant. I mean, there's still doping going on. It's being masked well by scientists who are advanced on what we can test. So it's still there.
I think my feeling is we have to treat the past. We have to answer to the past in order to protect the future. And that past and the most dramatic and horrific state-sponsored doping program, and I know we'll go back there, but that's what changed sport forever. And it introduced an avenue of high-level scientific knowledge into sport, which is in part good, but also on the other side very harmful to junior athletes. And I think there is a hiccup in the system whereby they haven't addressed the past.
Yes.
That being the our level of administrators in sport, being FINA, IOC, have not addressed that.
Yes. Well, seeing we've opened with talking with that, let's continue talking with it, because you were obviously you won the Olympic gold medal in 1980, and you were the only non-Soviet bloc athlete at the time who won a gold medal against what we now know was systematic cheating across the East German team. How did it feel to actually compete at that time? And obviously we now know that there was a state-sponsored drug testing and drug implementation, I should say. How did that make you feel, knowing that those rumours were circulating around, but you still had to go in there with the mental attitude of being able to swim that race?
Look, it was very difficult because and I've sort of analysed it and reanalyzed it, and I come to the conclusion. There's two points here. One is that the steroids and the amount that the East Germans were actually inducing into their athletes was phenomenal. I mean, 3 times the amount of Ben Johnson, for example, if we recall Ben Johnson. But not only that, they had a psychological advantage, knowing that they were stronger, faster, more agile, more their recuperation was amazing. For example, if I took 3 days to recuperate, they'd take 20 minutes. And that's just in sport, that's a huge advantage, just to be
Yes.
able to recuperate and come back and get your system back on track to compete. So we had all that, and it was just the size of them as well. I mean, their bulk and their the looks of them. I mean, they were, you know, highly dosed up, and some of them have actually become men in effect during the process, which is of course is a problem in the whole scope of things. But as a competitor next to them, you know, it's tough. And I think we were blown away in Montreal in 76 when they first came to the scene in such a dynamic way. They won 11 out of the 13 medals in swimming, which they also did in Moscow. And to come up against it, it was just phenomenal, really. And you had to just look past it and put, I've always said, you have to put the blinkers on and not look at your competitor. And it was always just a challenge for me to swim my race and not consider who my opponent was. So
Yes.
it's a mind over matter. It really is. I mean, of course, because their matter was so much bigger and better than mine. But I obviously had the mental strength to pass through that.
Yeah, I can tell by reading the book and the way you just sort of, you know, described your approach, because you had your 200 butterfly first and then your 400, and you talked about the way the East Germans worked as a team and the tactics that they used to sort of take you out fast and throw you off your race plan. And I thought that was so insightful from you as a 17-year-old to take those two sort of lessons and then take it into your 800 and know what you were going to do.
Oh, I felt abused in the first two races.
Yes.
In that I saw myself get swallowed into their game.
Yes.
And that's not usually how I swim a race. Once you do that, you give in to someone else's race plan. And it's very it's hard to keep yourself focused. Because you see the swimmers on either side of you going out, and you think that that's the speed that is, and you're feeling good, and you go out with them.
Yeah.
And they were covered on both sides. And in those days, we had 3 competitors from each country. Now it's only 2. But with 3, what they did was they sent the 2 out with, like, in front. So I would go with them, and in butterfly, you look forward. And the other East German on the outside lane of where I was, she'd come home. So they held her back to come home. And I just got sucked into their game plan. And I think, you know, there was a lot of other stuff, as you probably read in the book, that happened in Moscow that was totally disturbing. You know, you warm up being disturbed by not getting to the pool in time, and they'd already changed, they'd already done the warm-up, and so you didn't have time. You had more doping controls than they ever did, and that took time. So time out of your own preparation and your concentration, and, you know, the food was, well, let's put it this way, not to be desired, at least for where we came from. And it was a totally different regime diet, and it just didn't go with our swimming program.
Yes. I mean, all of the things you talked about in the book and all of those hurdles, it's absolutely amazing that you won that gold medal and that you were so resilient, and the race was just brilliant to watch. You must look back on that now and just, you know, that must send shivers down your spine.
Well, it does actually, because that 800 meters freestyle, it was the last one, one of the last events of the games. And of course got my bronze medal in the 200 fly and fourth placing in the 400 free. Turned up to the 800, and with my coach we said I take it out easier, not go out with them, hold back. And of course, not hold back as much as I did, because I was a body and something length behind when you watch the race. And I'm even amazed that I said, wow, was I that far behind? And we decided we'd go at the 200 instead of, you know, 250 or 300 in an 800. It's strategic as well. But when I took off the wall, I think I surprised them because I had changed my race tactics. We didn't have all the videos back then to look at people's races, so that they had the splits of my races, so they could work out from that. But we didn't even know who was, you know, the East Germans. I knew them by the girls in the blue suits. I didn't even know their names. It didn't really matter to me because they were just the girls in the blue suits, and they were the ones to beat. And so when I went through the lineup, what was crazy was my head went into, well, I've got to save myself now for the rest of the 800 because I've gone out a bit earlier. I've got to save myself because they're going to come back at me because they've got more in their tank than I ever will have. And that played on my mind for over 400 meters. That's a long time.
Yes.
And I'm just pacing myself thinking they're coming back at me at this length because I didn't know their race plan. And yeah, I got to, and I said, when should I put the throttle down? When do I go on this? And that's, you come back to the point where, do you go for the time or do you go for the win? And in the Olympic Games, I'm sorry, you go for the win.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the time doesn't, I mean, the time is reflective, of course. And when I finished, I said, I still got more in my tank to keep going because I'd saved it all. But I was well in front at the end, and I think they were very disappointed, and they thought they had it. And I think the shock for the East German girls when they put their head down on the block when they touched the wall showed everything that they were supposed to take that out, and I had just completely annihilated them. So it was a good feeling.
I bet it was. It was great to watch. And I think also one of the pictures you had in the book, you were sort of in the middle of the two of them, and that they did look a bit shell shocked.
Yeah, I don't think it dawned. They were told as a team. They were, as you said earlier, they were a team. They worked as a team. The coaches didn't care who won. They just had to win. So whatever the cost was, they had to win. And they'd put anything, they'd sacrifice anything or anyone to do that. And hence, you know, the doping program was so heavily induced into the poor girls that, yeah, they were very disappointed because I think they felt shame as well. I haven't spoken to them, but just their faces, just their attitude after, they'd let down their team model. But yeah, I didn't care about that.
Yeah, of course not.
At the time, I was happy.
And you should be still happy. Have you ever had a chance to speak to any of the East German swimmers from that time? Not those two particularly, but any of the others?
Look, I was to reach out to them all. Sadly, when we've got to get the context of this era, and it was during the Cold War, and the Eastern Bloc, as we called it, was so closed. We called it behind the Iron Curtain, that being no one could get into any of those countries without an invitation. And the invitation was few and far between, and you could only see what they wanted you to see. So our knowledge and our relationship with anyone on that side of the curtain was about non-existent. So, and as time goes on, you know, I've put all this back into my boxes,
yes,
and moved on. But it is time to tell this story. And yes. I think it's not only my story, it's many, as I said in the beginning, many of those who participated, not only the females, but also the males and people from the Western world and the Eastern world. We all bear some the anguish of that era. And I think it's now time that was resolved and that we talk to it.
Yes. Do you have any hope that those medals will be re-awarded to the rightful owners?
The IOC now has a program called the Medal Reallocation Program, which is already in place, and they've done it for 2000, 2008, 2012, 2016. So it's not like it's a new thing for them, and it has to be said that the East German girls and their doping program was so meticulously run that every part of their program was written down. So there's proof.
Yes.
And that proof has been taken to a court of law in Germany from the girls against their coaches and administrators. And they've proven that it was they were doped, and they were doped heavily.
Yep.
And to the extent that was in the papers or the files that came out of the Stasi files, German police at the time. And with that proof, I think the IOC and FINA and of course athletics have to take that into consideration and say there is proof here. It's been called out in a court of law. We've got to remember that the East Germans were never tested positive. They had a very, as you said earlier, the scientific knowledge, the people who were testing it were the same people who were making the drugs. So you will always put one a little bit behind the other. And, you can switch out just molecules of an ingredient and the test doesn't pull it up until later. And that's where the IOC is today with their blood testing.
Right.
They can actually look in and see if that was those banned substances were actually used. So they can go back in time, which they have done, to call out the cheats. Yeah.
So do they have any samples stored from 1980, 1976?
1976 and 1980, I think up until 80, maybe 92 or 98. I'd have to reconfirm that. But it was based on urine samples, and until they got the blood testing happening, now it's obviously more precise. But with urine, you have to be very specific, and you can't keep a urine sample.
Right. Yeah, so that does make it very difficult, doesn't it?
And that's yeah. I can hear the voices of caution saying that, well, we haven't got the proof on the day, etc. But the proof is on the day.
Exactly.
They were actually given testosterone and anabolic steroids and other performance enhancing drugs leading up to the blocks on that day.
Yes.
In Moscow, there was no positive tests. You have to ask yourself, how did that happen?
Why? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the IOC have this committee now, and do World Aquatics have any say in sort of moving that along so that people can get some kind of resolution, or is it just sort of sitting there talking about it?
Well, it's a bit of a tit for tat program, but the FINA, the world body now, World Aquatics, has its jurisdiction for the swimming world and the swimming championships, except at the Olympic Games. Although they're party to the Olympic Games and they subscribe to the Olympic Games, that the program of doping is actually under the auspices of the International Olympic Committee and not the Federation, whereby all world championships, which is the same question, why hasn't FINA acted in a way? So to answer your question, yes, it has to be one body or the other, and or both, that can subscribe to looking at the record books and realigning them with what their constitution and what the fair play and the ideals of sport, and a fair playing field, and doping is the most dangerous and the most shameful abuse of those ideals. And therefore I do believe that they have to do something to answer this, because not only the East, not only the West, that being America, England, Australia, they lost out on their medal placings. The East Germans as well want to see this, the reconciliation of this and the recognition, and set the record book straight. So I think it is time that this is spoken to.
Yeah. And in 1980, not only did you have to deal with what was happening with the East Germans, we had a boycott in Australia, and the Fraser government decided not to endorse sending a team. How did that play into your mindset? Because in reading through that, I mean, I didn't realize that there was a number, they made a decision, the AOC made a decision to go, but then they decided again and they had another vote, and it was all up in the air. How does that play on your mind when you're training?
Oh, it was horrific. And, you know, the athletes that went to Moscow lived through the most disastrous time in sport, I think, ever. And especially in Australia, although, you know, people said, oh, well, you went, but we went through so much hardship. The team, you know, we were given this, we're going, we're not, we're going, we're not, we're going, we're not. Would you get into the pool and do the amount of training that's needed to get that the precision and the physique to and the mental, it just played on our minds so much that our competition ended up being, you know, whether we're going or not, just getting on the blocks, just getting onto the plane was a real struggle for us. And it went on for, when Carter called President Carter, the US president, called the threat of a boycott in January. That was only 6 months out from the games. Now, if you look at the kids today, they're in total heavy training. Their minds are set for a goal. Now, if you disturb that by saying, look, mate, we're not sure if you're going, you know, well, maybe you are, maybe you're not, maybe who knows. And we had already been selected, so we knew we were on the team and whether or not we were going. So, and then, you know, my family and myself and others received death threats because Australia was torn apart over this. The government was asking for us not to go. The Olympic Committee, who has the right of decision whether or not a country participates, the invitation is sent to the National Olympic Body, not the government. For that reason, the national body was able to override that and say, yes, we are sending a team. And I believe, quite honestly, that by us going to the games, the Olympic movement has survived. If we didn't go to the games, if some of the Western countries didn't go to those games, there would be no more Olympics. So in effect, I think we you know, held the torch alight for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. I just can't even imagine the pressure that you were under then.
Oh, it was horrific.
It
was terrible. Well, you sort of say, why am I training? Why am I in the pool? Why am I doing all these hard yards? For what? So your mind's going all over the place. And one day you go, oh, look, give it a go. They haven't yet called it. And then you're sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for another decision. And then the government made them make another decision. And then and then even another decision. And so we were battled with 3 decision-making processes. And that was we're only talking 4 weeks out from the games this happened. 4 weeks.
That's just crazy, isn't it? It's just hard to imagine, because obviously I was quite young then, so I didn't sort of know all that sort of stuff behind it. I just watched it on TV and saw you win and saw Mishka, the little bear, and the opening ceremony and thought, oh, wow, this is what I want to do. But you don't realize until you hear someone's story written down like that, what was going on behind the scenes. That's why it's such an important story to tell.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. And I think too, the story is one of the first of an athlete who took who lived through that journey. And also because I was later after my career, I was part of I've been privy to the administration of sport and how that all works, and I was able to add the contextual part of it into the story, and hopefully expressed it in more simple terms, because it is a complex world of sport is complex. And people sort of say, it's the coach, it's the head of the sport, and it's the referees, but it's a lot more complex than all that. There's a lot of parameters in it, and I think to be able to put that in the story, and talk also of the East German girls in the story, because I wanted to have that parallel in the book, so that there is how we were treated back in Australia was horrific. We had to put up with, I call them the men in blue suits, other than the girls in blue suits, but the administrators didn't want us. It seemed like they didn't want us to win. They didn't want us to do well, and we were hampered every step of the way. Every step of the way, we had problems.
Yeah.
And that's not only me, but I think most of the athletes of those in Australia, at least, we were fought with this question of how do we get through our own system.
Yes.
And yet the East Germans were, looked after. They were given their cars. They were given their houses. They were pampered. They were given massages. They were given all this. But as a parallel, we were treated like political pawns in a fry pan, just to use us for their own egos.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And amongst that, I feel your description of, the female athletes, even being female swimmers, being even sort of more harshly dealt with than the male swimmers. The male swimmers having a better motel, and better conditions, and being able to go out and all those kind of things. And the female swimmers, no, and weigh-ins, which I mean, still
happen today.
Still happening today.
Happening,
and they're still talking about those things today. Why haven't they improved?
Yeah, it's something that the sports needs to at least give the opportunity. We always used to look to the US as the starring group, because that we felt that they were much better looked after than we were. And I think it causes a lot of friction, not only on a up to the administration level, but also in the team itself, because they have, and the have-nots, and it was just so sad to see the females just being treated so differently than the males. And probably the males didn't even see that difference, because they were living a different world than us. They were allowed the food on the plane, and we weren't. We were locked in our rooms for 6 hours, and they were allowed out to the steeplechase, just as an adventure. It was just all wrong. It was so wrong.
It absolutely. And I mean, look, we've come a long way. I mean, these Olympic Games are going to be 50-50 representation of female and male, but it's taken a long time to get there.
Yes, and after 1980, the President Samaranch of the IOC president, because the IOC was on its knees, because they were struggling to stay relevant. There was the Goodwill Games, there was other things happening around, and the world of sport had come apart at that moment. And I was fortunate to be invited as one of the 25 athletes around the world to address the IOC. And we've got to remember, before that, the athlete was treated, we weren't allowed a voice. There was no acts. If you opened your mouth, you were condemned and you were punished. Whereas now we've opened that door, and I think what we did at that Congress, and I say that the Sebastian Coe and Thomas Bach and I were in this room writing out the speeches to actually address the Congress and say, we want gender equality. This is no good to have 22% of female participation.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it. Also, there was no females in the administration of sport. No IOC member was a female. So this is only, 40 years ago. I know it sounds a long time, but and we've come a long way, but finally we're 50-50 in Paris, as you say, of participation numbers.
Numbers, yeah.
It's not exactly 50-50.
yeah, exactly. And administration wise, because I know you've worked at Sports Commission in Australia and Swimming Australia. In the IOC now, is that becoming a little bit more balanced, or is it still heavily weighted in the male favour?
Look, there's still a long way to go.
Right.
I think in all the sport, I think there's and I sat on the boards and I see the attitude and sure, I mean, when you bring athletes on board, we're strong characters. We have to be in order to succeed.
Yes.
But there is a lot of intelligence in with those in that quorum of athletes, and we need to embrace that. And I think there's still a ceiling that has to be broken by moving the age even on.
Yes.
And they keep putting the age limits on. But for example, in FINA, we had a president who was 80 whatever years of age. How is that relevant to today, who sees the athlete of today? There's too much of a gap. And I think there are some good people in sport, and we have to let them through the door.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, I hope all the young female swimmers out there read your book, because, I love the fact that you still pursued your academic side of things as well as your swimming, which must have been pretty tough at the time, but you obviously went and studied in the US. How did that impact your swimming long term, do you think?
Oh, that was my savior, really.
Yes.
Going to the US, it was the first time that that the NC2As opened, well, it was under a different title back then, but they opened the door to female sports scholarships to complete your education with your athletic career. And it was such I would have given up swimming because I came back from Moscow. I was offered the first scholarship to the AIS, the Institute of Sport. And when they turned around and said, but you'll only be swimming and you won't be doing education, I said, sorry, I've got to reject the offer, because I knew I needed my education. And if I had another 1 year, 2 years of just swimming, I wasn't able, when you finish swimming, you don't have anything. Yes. You need an education to fulfill your life after sport, whatever that looks like. But you do need to maintain that education, and the US was my savior in doing that, and being able to swim, of course, onto 84.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Take us back to the very start of your career, which, I mean, you had some remarkable achievements at a really young age, like breaking a lot of Shane Gould's early records. How did that sort of shape what you were going to eventually sort of come into leading into 1980, those sort of early experiences in Sydney?
I think that the early experiences is that making the team was just the biggest and best thing that and I was 13 at the time, so it did come early in my career. So I didn't have to wait too long. Today that's not possible, because they and even back then it was questionable whether you should take such a young athlete across. But my eyes were on winning gold at Montreal. So the age didn't worry me, wasn't a concern to me, but it was to everyone else.
Yes.
I think there was the onslaught of course, of what we said, the East Germans sort of hit home hard. And when I came back, and the treatment of us for the preparation for those games, after making the team all excited, you think, wow, we're going to be looked after, and I'd heard stories, and it was a dream. But then I started that journey, and it was just a tragedy. We were billeted out. We were at the other side of the country, 4 hours away, 3 hours in time changes, and no communication with our families, no communication with our coaches. We didn't even have our own coaches. We had no one who knew us, or we didn't know anyone. We had to make the new friends on the team, and we had to train with coaches who we never even knew about. So, and I think that was really tough for 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And then we got to Moscow and hit the East Germans. So that was another rolling ball, right in front of our noses, and
double whammy.
But I do think it makes you strong. I mean, it obviously, but when I came back from Montreal, I wanted to quit swimming. And I had to be, coerced back into the pool. And I think a lot of athletes, you have a bad experience, and it kills your dreams.
Yes.
And that's what administrators need to understand. You can't kill those dreams. The dreams are the important part of an athletic career.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. When you were 13 in Montreal, and at 15 you broke 800-meter world record, which you didn't swim the 800 in Montreal. What made you transition to that longer distance?
The longer distance was the coercion back into the pool to swim an event that wasn't one of my pet events. My pet events were the 200 freestyle. Well, the events that I made, the 76 games, was a 200 freestyle and 200 butterfly, and the 400 freestyle, in fact. But when I came back, the media is very, very persuasive here, and if you did a bad time, I felt that it would have been crucifying me for the rest of my career. So I didn't want to go out like that. My coach said, let's go into a race that you've never swum before, and see how you feel. And sadly for me, because I don't like the 800, I didn't like the distances, but I still swam so well that I was very close to the world record time just by swimming my first 800, and then that became a target. Yeah, silly things happen, but sometimes you don't get to choose what you're good at.
Yes, exactly right. And when you broke that world record, when you were 15, what do you remember about that race that day?
It was such a funny story, because I'd gone up to, this was a new program in Australia. Australia was critical that we hadn't any international competition. We'd only compete twice a year, and once nationally. And we had no international competition except for the Olympic Games and the Commonwealth Games, and that was it. There's the World Championships had just started at that time. Right. So there was just before, but not like we see today. So we were critical. The sport had to do something. So there was a sponsor who came onto the fore and said, let's do a different setup, a finals, just finals. And I said, that's me. I can just swim once and that'll do me. So yeah, went up and swam, was swimming along, and I was out in front, and I all of a sudden clicked over into a song, but only 2 lines of a song, and it just went over and over and over in my head. So I totally lost count of the 16 laps that I had to swim, and waiting for that whistle to blow was the longest because I thought, have I overstepped my mark? Have I gone too far? But when the whistle blows, you have 2 laps left. And when I heard that whistle, I go, yes, I've got 2 laps left. Off I go. And I broke the world record. And it was it was out of the blue in a way for me. And I beat the East Germans time. So I obviously had it in me, and I wouldn't say it's a relaxing swim. No swim is relaxing.
That's right.
But to sing a song, you're in a zone, and that zone gives you that energy, I guess. And I've heard a lot of swimmers since say, I'm in that zone. And that zone is the ultimate moment that, it obviously works.
What was your breathing pattern? Did you have one, or did you just breathe when you needed to?
No, every 3.
Every 3.
I was always coached every 3.
Yeah.
I was very regular on my breathing, and in swimming you can have different body types, but you can all achieve the same time. It doesn't. I mean, I know that now is a bit more. They seem like they're more one body type, but back then we were all different body types. But you achieve the same goal, and each one has a different stroke. So no one stroke works. We didn't have the biomechanical data, nor the physiology of how to, and the nutrition, and there was no scientific research. And I must say, going back to the East Germans, I believe that they actually introduced that into the sport.
Yeah.
Because they weren't only doping, they were also using different methods of coaching, and using the lactates, using the breathing per lap, using the recuperation and dynamics with the heavy workload and how much rest you need, and giving the athlete the rest. We never got that rest. We were just flogged and flogged and flogged and flogged. And and that's why I always work better with my first coach and to do 90%. And that's what they're doing today. They're doing the 80%, 90% hit outs, rather than the up and downs. So it's become more exciting. I wish I was a swimmer today.
I know. Are you in the water at all these days?
Yeah. I still swim. I use it as what I call my Zen moment. All my mind thinks and puts things in order. So I think it's a beautiful sport, and it's good on the body, and I think it's it being in the water is for me just my element.
Yes. How many sort of opportunities in pools do you get in Switzerland, where you're mainly based?
Yeah, look, I started up an adult swim school,
Right.
and so I teach
I
teach the adults, and I swim myself, and there are pools around. There's less access than there is in Australia for pools, but I come back to Australia very often too, and yes, I love the ocean. So
yes.
And we are lucky here to have the ocean at our front door.
Yes, oh, lovely. What do you think sets Australian swimmers apart from the rest of the world? Because I think the culture that they have around the team now is looking, I think, a lot better than it was a few years ago. What do you think about that culture and what we do here in Australia?
Look, I agree with you, and I think that it's where I borrow the idea of the team. They've become a team. We were individuals, although we were a team, and we've had great friendship. We were just a group of individuals thrown together, and they never brought us in as a team. And I think that is one of the most important factors for performance is to have a group behind you and all going for the same thing. So the jealousies are taken out. And sure, we're not talking about competition, we're talking about jealousy. And there's a difference between the two. And I think we suffered a lot of jealousies from the administration down. And jealousy was probably part of the culture. Not between athletes. It was more, but you felt that coming down. Today, I hear that now they've got their own coaches on deck. The coaches, if they've got the swimmer on the team, they have access to their athlete, and that makes a huge difference. And the coaches themselves are more aligned with each other than back in the day, when they were also individuals. So I think there's a mending of that, and more of a group help. And they obviously have all the external assistance as well that we didn't have. And they have psychologists, and I think that is, like, I did sports psych, my master's in sports psych, and I see, it's like in business that it's about performance. It's about reaching further. How do you get those goals, and where do we go with those? And I think that's what's born into it, and trained and pampered in a way to increase the performance options that they have. And they're you can see it on deck how they stand with more. They stand proud. They're positive. They're when you talk to them, they're more happier people. I think I say that in a general term, but happier people on the deck than where we were straggly little kids. We were, even though we had a role. But we were just teenagers, and now they're, of course, 28, 29, 30s, and I can see why they stay in. From Baden-Baden in the Congress of the IOC, and sorry to take this back to that, but that's when we asked for the opening of the amateur rule.
Yes.
Before we couldn't earn money. Today they can.
Yes.
And by us, the athletes, having that voice and opening that up and forcing the administration to open up the opportunity for athletes to earn money, we see that today. And I think that was a huge win for athletes, to actually be able to earn money.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge legacy that you've left the sport by being able to do that from your own successes, and then having that academic and education side behind you. I'm sure that was one of the reasons that you were chosen to go to Baden-Baden, because you're articulate and able to express those thoughts. So the swimmers that are on our team or about to be on our team today, I hope that they read this book as well, so that they know what you did.
Yeah, I think it's an important part of their who they are today, and it's so important. I did actually, in writing this book, I wrote a book for the IOC on the athlete's voice, and traced with a German professor, and traced the program from Baden-Baden and onto today, or onto 2000. But it's an important part of the history of why they're able now to live in their 5-star hotels or whatever. There's more money in sport because of it. Sport, I mean, sure, it's changing, and we know that it's changing again today. But at least it set a new standard, and one that, now the athlete can stay until they're 33, or back then you had to go and get a job.
Yes.
You had no choice.
Yeah, that's very true. I wanted to finish off today by asking you about some of the coaches that you've worked with, like Bill Sweetenham, Don Talbot, Dick Kane. Who was the toughest, and who did you enjoy working with the most? They're all tough.
They're all tough. They were all very, very tough. I think there's tough and tough. What we did with Don Talbot was just crazily tough. I mean, it just blew my mind that he would invent anything, and it's to do. Oh, I think the coaches that worked the best for me were those who understood that the challenge, you've got to put a challenge in front of the athlete. You have to keep challenging them. You have to say and give them a goal, even though it's like in a training set. I think there's a goal that has to, when you want performance, when you want them to stretch out and get that little bit extra that we search for the threshold and everything else, I think there's that. And if a coach can read you well, I've always said a good coach is an artist as well. They're a bit crazy. A lot of them are very crazy. No, don't take that wrong, you coaches, but I'm probably crazy too. So I think it's more so as well reading your athlete. And if you can read the athlete, and I always said a good coach has to know, is a good trainer of animals. Like my first coach was a good trainer of horses, and he went out and he coached the horses and then come back to the pool and coach us. But a horse doesn't talk, of course, and you have to learn to read the signs. And I think that's the sign of a good coach. And toughness, sadly, it is tough. Swimming is tough, but it's also it's a team sport, and people think not, but it is a team sport. And the camaraderie and the joy you have in just having your teammates, I think overrides any of, you're living the same thing, so you all go through the same program. So and it's achieving your results, whatever they are. They don't have to be the gold medal, but they could be just a time or just feeling good in the water. So as long as you all continually set your goals, I think that's and the coach has to be part of that. They have to feed that to you.
Yes, absolutely. Michelle, it's been such a pleasure talking to you today. I could talk to you all day because I love hearing about all these stories, but I really probably do need to let you go.
Yes.
So thank you very, very much, and wishing you every success with the book. And we'll put a link to the book and where people can buy it in our show notes so that they can check it out.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thanks again, and to all your listeners. You're a great interviewer. You've gone over every single point.
Oh, good. I'm glad we covered it all.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Bye.
Okay. Cheers.